Hello and welcome to On Leading with Greatness. I'm Jim Salvucci. This week's installment, Great Leadership is the Poetry of Possibility. If a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind, of what then is an empty desk a sign? Albert Einstein, apocryphal. Everyone, even the most thoughtless, has an organizing principle or set of principles. Some organize their thinking around rigid philosophies or belief systems. Others seem to shift their thinking as the mood strikes them. But even they organize around some principle or set of principles, however vague and amorphous. And no one is perfect, so absolute consistency is an aspiration, not a reality for all. My organizing principle, my aspiration, is logic. I reject unproven or unprovable systems and consider them a lot of woo-woo and wishful thinking. Others, though, live their lives by them and do quite well, thank you. Some, no doubt, do better than I do with logic, an observation that has become an important addition to my understanding of how and why people organize thought. Systems of thought are highly subjective, full of shortcomings, and should be fluid. For instance, sometimes my logic fails me, and I have to accept that reality. When applied with a little leeway, when not open to the unexpected, logic can mislead. It transforms from an ally of newness and creativity into an enemy of wonder. While I loathe illogic, my true enemy is rigidity. The best leaders think about these systems, their own and others, to understand how leadership functions. They consider systems of thought when they make decisions or need to persuade. They contemplate when to press those systems and when to ease off. The thing with all of these principles is that none of them is right for every situation. They all have their shortcomings, which manifest most obviously when they are applied too rigidly, too closed off from other perspectives. So let's conclude that an open system is a sign of an open mind. Of what then is a closed system a sign? An open book. Albert Einstein gets saddled with all sorts of bogus quotations, witticisms, and wisdom, such as the epigraph at the start of this piece. But here's something he actually wrote. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. Most leadership advice, in contrast, tends to assiduously avoid the mysterious. It doles out 3-pillar strategies and 12-step programs, all regulated by rote metrics without accounting for the serendipity that life and humanity inevitably engender. Leadership is, after all, a purely human concern. Therefore, it should most concern itself with humanism, rather than privileging technical procedures, mechanical operations. In fact, that's what's missing from most leadership advice, as well as from the pure logic I hold so near and dear, the mysterious. As Einstein suggests, the mysterious is a source of wonder, which is the beginning of inquiry and creativity. The mysterious is also the source of all, that sensation that washes over us in the presence of the beautiful, the majestic, or the sublime, leaving us with no explanation, no words, just emotion. And can you honestly deny that truly great leadership is awesome, worthy of all? In contemplating all this and wondering, it struck me that I was endowed with a love of logic at a young age through genetics, upbringing, or some other mystical means. At the same time, I have a fascination with the mysterious and a tolerance for the unknowable or even the ineffable. That is, the poetic, which shouldn't be a surprise given my background as a literature professor. Still, it's a bit embarrassing to admit, but I used to struggle with reading poetry. I really wanted to be able to read it, but I wasn't exposed to enough of it until I went to college, where I nearly drowned in poetry. It took me years to find my depth in the vast, unfathomable sea of the poetic arts. Years later, when I was a professor introducing poetry to undergrads, I felt their frustration. I'd been there. So I created a basic guide for them to use when encountering a poem for the first time. It followed the logic of putting the poem in a context, historical, cultural, etc., before tackling the poetic language. There it was, logic. I wanted them to approach poetry logically, but my little primer included this preamble. Reading poetry can be highly individual, and there is no one way to do it effectively. I was more interested in getting students started in the art of reading a poem rather than plodding through some rigidly right way or by following some algorithmic recipe. I pushed against my inclination for logic in order to demystify the process, to open them to the mystery of the poem. Reading a poem requires an exertion of systemic logic, to be sure, but it also requires an embrace of serendipity and all its delightful illogic, and of all, at least with good poetry. It requires, above all, wonder, as does any process of inquiry, discovery, and creation, which is only logical. This is true of encounters with all humanist texts, such as novels, history, philosophy, and theology. If you want to read them well, you need to shoot your logic through with a bit of illogic. You need to approach them with a system that you're utterly willing to overthrow, undermine, or explode to get at the wonder and awe of insight and meaning. Indeed, one of the worst ways to read poetry or anything is to apply a stringent system. Plenty of people, even literary scholars, do so, and it ultimately leads to imposing strictures that can't contain the text. Rules have their limits, and few things can test limits as effectively as great text. Indeed, like text, the best systems sow the seeds of their own destruction in order to adapt and grow. Great writing, poetry and the rest, subverts the tyranny of systems, which is precisely why they're so awesome. Just like leadership. Leadership follows a set of broad principles, but too often people want to substitute specific steps or strategies to regulate operations. However, leadership is about human behavior, both the leaders and the team members, and human stuff is inherently messy. It gets in the way of the regular. More precisely, the regular gets in the way of it. What I'm claiming may frustrate you a bit. After all, if we don't have specific rules or strategies to follow, how can we lead effectively? And here I am declaring those very rules and strategies can hinder effective leadership. It's like your English professor saying, read this sonnet and write a paper by Monday. In the absence of a strategy or a regulated approach, where do you even begin? The key is not to abandon logic, but to put it aside for a bit. Consider first leadership principles. All great leadership starts with knowing yourself and developing your character. From there, as with poetry, you need to be open. Open to possibility, including the possibility that the strategies won't work, or at least not for long. Open to the serendipity of human behavior. Open to the expansive potential of your team members. Open to their awesomeness. Too much? Not if you're intent on doing leadership well rather than merely right. The organizing principle is logic, yes, but logic tinged with a love of, or at least a respect for, the human factor, including the self. It's just like reading a poem. A logical process steeped in possibility and driven by wonder. That's leadership. Great leadership is the poetry of possibility. So go ahead and clutter up that desk with books. Allow a mess to unfurl in front of you. Relinquish the need to control with logic and unburden your mind from the tyranny of systems, but don't abandon logic and systems entirely. There's an art to leadership, a poetry, but that poetry, like all poetry, still bears the weight of meaning and meaningfulness. As Alexander Pope wrote, the sound must seem an echo to the sense. Only then will your team and you have the room to thrive. How do you balance the system of leadership with the art of leadership? How do you balance meaning and form in your leadership? Leaders follow logic, but develop an understanding of and appreciation for the value of serendipity, and I can help. Unlock the great leader within. Download my free resource, the Transform to Greatness Toolkit, now at thegreatleadershiptoolkit.com. I look forward to hearing from you.